The room was an artist's haven, a kaleidoscope of colors, canvases stacked haphazardly against walls, and the unmistakable scent of linseed oil hanging in the air. A grand studio, flooded with morning light through towering windows, seemed the perfect place for creative genius to flourish. Yet today, it was not the artistry that held the attention of the gathered onlookers, but the conspicuous absence of the studio's most captivating figure. Lucien Reynaud, Parisian painter of renown and charm, paced frantically before his latest masterpiece, a portrait of the captivating model Vivienne Marchand. The portrait itself was an arresting image. Vivienne seated gracefully on a velvet chaise, her deep blue gown shimmering in contrast to her alabaster skin, and her golden curls cascading down her shoulders like liquid sunlight. Yet where was Vivienne herself? Gone! Disparu! Reynaud cried, his hands trembling as he gestured at the empty chaise. She was here just yesterday, and now, poof, vanished as if spirited away. Inspector Georges Lambert of the Paris police, a burly man with a practical mind, eyed the scene skeptically. "Monsieur Reynaud," he rumbled, his voice low and authoritative, "you are certain she did not simply leave of her own accord? A young woman in Paris. Perhaps she found a more profitable engagement." Reynaud shook his head vehemently. "Impossible. Vivienne adored her work. She would never abandon a commission halfway. Besides, she left everything behind, her coat, her handbag, even her favorite brooch, the one shaped like a lily." A murmur of concern passed through the assembled art students and patrons. Everyone knew that Vivienne was fiercely protective of her few valuable possessions, especially the lily brooch, a gift from her late mother. As whispers of suspicion grew, a striking figure entered the room, a dapper gentleman, his mustache immaculately groomed, his suit pressed to perfection. Hercule Poirot stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Pardon, mes amis," he said softly, his accent lending a melodic rhythm to his speech. "I could not help but overhear. Might I inquire as to the nature of the disturbance?" Lambert eyed him warily. "You are—" Poirot smiled indulgently. "Hercule Poirot, I was merely passing by when I noticed the commotion. I could not resist investigating." Reynaud's face brightened. "Monsieur Poirot, you must help. Vivienne is missing. My muse, my inspiration. The painting. It is nothing without her." Poirot approached the portrait, his keen gaze absorbing every brush stroke. "Mademoiselle Marchand. An exquisite subject indeed. Tell me, Monsieur Reynaud, when precisely did you last see her?" Reynaud hesitated. "Yesterday afternoon. We took a break from the sitting. I went to fetch tea, and when I returned, she was gone." Lambert frowned. "And you saw nothing suspicious? No one entering or leaving the studio?" The artist shook his head. "Nothing. I was only gone a few minutes." Poirot turned to the scattered belongings. He lifted the brooch carefully, examining the clasp. "Curious," he murmured, as if speaking to himself. "Inspector Lambert, may I suggest we examine the rest of the building? A disappearance is not always an abduction." Lambert grunted non-committally, but signaled his men to begin the search. Poirot, meanwhile, continued to examine the painting, his fingers tracing the air just above the painted face. There is something about the composition, something not quite right. Lambert, exasperated, muttered, "It's just a portrait. What does it have to do with a missing girl?" Poirot merely smiled. "Ah, but sometimes, mon ami, the answer lies not in what is present, but in what is missing." As the investigation began, Poirot's eyes glimmered with intrigue. The vanished model, the deserted studio, there was more to this than met the eye, and Hercule Poirot was determined to discover the truth. Poirot's sharp eyes continued to flit about the studio as Lambert's men moved methodically through the building, their footsteps echoing against the polished marble floors. "Reynaud, now seated on a low stool, wrung his hands, his usually flamboyant demeanor reduced to quiet despair. Poirot turned his attention back to the portrait. He leaned in, his face mere inches from the canvas, his gaze tracing every delicate line and stroke. The artist had captured Vivienne's ethereal beauty with extraordinary precision. The slight tilt of her head, the distant yet piercing gaze, the half-smile that hinted at secrets untold. Yet, for all its technical brilliance, something about the painting struck Poirot as incomplete. He straightened and cast a glance at the empty chaise. "Monsieur Reynaud," Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm. "You said you stepped out to fetch tea. Was this your usual practice during a sitting?" Reynaud nodded, dabbing at his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Yes, monsieur. Vivienne would often need a moment to rest, to stretch, to clear her mind. I never lingered long, merely a few minutes. The water for tea is just down the hall." Poirot's mustache twitched as he considered this. "And when you returned, the room was as you left it, save for Vivienne's absence?" "Yes, except—" Reynaud's eyes narrowed, as if struggling to recall a faint but troubling detail. "Except for the window, it was slightly open." "Ah." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "This window here?" He moved to the tall arched window on the eastern side of the studio. Though securely latched now, the faintest trace of disturbed dust on the windowsill caught his attention. He ran a gloved finger along the sill, then turned back to Reynaud. "Are you certain you closed it before you left the room?" Reynaud hesitated. I cannot be sure, monsieur. It is possible I left it ajar, but I do not recall doing so." Poirot's expression remained thoughtful as he straightened, his gaze shifting once more to the portrait. He took a step back, his head tilted slightly as if considering the work from a fresh angle. Then, abruptly, he turned on his heel and began a slow circuit of the room, his polished shoes tapping softly against the wooden floor. He paused at the chaise, lifting a corner of the velvet cushion, then stooped to peer beneath it. A soft gasp escaped his lips. He reached beneath the chaise and drew out a thin, elegant cigarette holder, ivory with a delicate gold band. He held it up to the light, examining the faint smudge of lipstick along its rim. Reynaud's eyes widened. "That is not Vivienne's," he whispered, his face growing pale. "She never smoked." Poirot raised a brow. "No? And you are quite certain of this?" "Oui, monsieur. Vivienne was quite particular about such things. She despised the habit." Poirot's fingers closed gently around the slender object. "Interesting," he murmured, slipping it carefully into a handkerchief before tucking it into his jacket pocket. Perhaps our missing mademoiselle was not alone in this room after all. Lambert, returning from a brief inspection of the hallway, caught the last of Poirot's remark. "You believe there was someone else here?" he asked, his thick brows drawing together in a frown. Poirot merely smiled. "I believe, mon cher Lambert, that we must broaden our perspective. Disappearances often involve more than one party, n'est-ce pas?" As if on cue, a sudden commotion erupted near the door. One of the officers had returned, guiding a nervous, well-dressed young woman into the studio. She had dark, shoulder-length hair and wide, frightened eyes. She clutched a small handbag tightly, her fingers white with tension. "Monsieur Poirot," the officer said, his tone brisk, "this woman was seen leaving the building around the time of the disappearance." The young woman's eyes darted around the room, taking in the scattered canvases and the intense, calculating gaze of Poirot. She swallowed hard. I am Elise Fournier," she stammered, her French crisp yet tinged with a hint of nervousness. "I work at the café downstairs. I sometimes bring coffee to the artists." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you were here yesterday, mademoiselle, in this very studio?" Elise hesitated, her fingers tightening on the strap of her bag. "Oui, monsieur. I brought Monsieur Reynaud his usual order, a double espresso." Reynaud's head snapped up, his face a mask of surprise. "But I did not order espresso yesterday, mademoiselle. I took only tea as always during a sitting." Elise's eyes widened, and a faint blush crept up her cheeks. "Oh, perhaps I am mistaken. It must have been another day." Poirot's gaze sharpened, his keen mind already unraveling the subtle threads of her lie. "Come now, mademoiselle," he said, softly, his voice as smooth as a polished marble tile. "Let us not begin with the deception. You were here yesterday, were you not?" Elise's mouth opened, then closed again. She seemed to shrink under Poirot's intense scrutiny, her pulse visibly fluttering at her throat. She glanced at the door as if considering flight, but Poirot's presence held her in place. "Oui," she whispered at last, her eyes darting nervously between Poirot and the dismayed Reynaud. "Yes, I was here, but I saw nothing, I swear it." Poirot's moustache twitched, and he inclined his head ever so slightly. "Of course, mademoiselle. And perhaps, when you have calmed yourself, you will remember a small but important detail that you have forgotten. For now, I would ask that you remain nearby. I may have more questions for you soon." Elise's breath came in short, nervous bursts, but she nodded, clutching her bag as if it were a lifeline. Poirot watched her retreat, his eyes never leaving her trembling form until she disappeared into the hallway. As the door clicked shut behind her, Poirot's gaze returned to the portrait of Vivienne, and his lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Ah," he murmured to himself. "The picture becomes clearer, but the frame remains uncertain." Poirot's gaze lingered on the door through which Elise had just fled, her hurried footsteps echoing faintly down the hall. He turned to Lambert, who had folded his thick arms across his chest, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "There, mon ami," Poirot said softly. "We have a thread. Perhaps a fragile one, but a thread nonetheless." Lambert grunted. "The girl is frightened. She likely saw something she should not have, or worse, she's involved herself." Poirot tapped his fingertips together, his eyes gleaming with intrigue. "Perhaps. But fear alone is not proof of guilt. We must be careful not to mistake uneasiness for malice." He turned back to the portrait, his mind racing through the scattered fragments of the puzzle. The cigarette holder, the open window, the nervous café girl, all disconnected pieces waiting to be arranged into a coherent whole. He had solved enough cases to know that the smallest, most innocuous detail often concealed the heart of the matter. Reynaud, who had been watching the exchange in silent distress, suddenly spoke, his voice quavering. "Monsieur Poirot, you do not truly believe that Elise had anything to do with Vivienne's disappearance, do you?" Poirot smiled gently. "I believe, monsieur, that everyone in this affair has a part to play, whether they realize it or not. But tell me, had Mademoiselle Fournier ever visited your studio before?" Reynaud hesitated, his face flushed with uncertainty. "She has brought me coffee from time to time, yes. She is friendly, always polite, but no, I would not say we are close. Vivienne never mentioned her." Poirot's expression remained thoughtful. He had noted the fleeting look of embarrassment in Elise's eyes, the quick, darting glances she had cast at the portrait as if afraid it might somehow betray her. There was more to her presence here than mere delivery of coffee. Lambert, clearly growing impatient with the abstract direction of Poirot's thoughts, interjected. "And what of the window, Poirot? You think someone came in that way? Surely that would be madness in broad daylight." Poirot lifted a hand, silencing his friend with a slight wave. "Perhaps, but let us not dismiss the unlikely. Sometimes what seems the most absurd is, in truth, the most rational once understood." He moved to the window once more, unlatching it and pushing it open. A cool breeze swept into the room, ruffling the loose sheets of charcoal sketches scattered across the nearby table. Poirot leaned out, glancing downward to the cobbled courtyard below. It was a considerable drop, but not impossible to navigate for someone determined or desperate enough. He noted a narrow ledge running just below the windowsill, its worn stone darkened in patches as if recently scuffed by the scrape of a shoe. Poirot straightened, closing the window with a soft click. "No," he said quietly, more to himself than to Lambert or Raynaud. "Not madness, only desperation." He turned back to Raynaud, his eyes sharp. "Monsieur, do you recall any of Vivienne's other visitors? Anyone who might have taken an interest in her beyond the professional?" Raynaud's face clouded. "She had admirers, of course. A young woman as beautiful as Vivienne would naturally attract attention, but she was careful. She did not encourage them, at least not to my knowledge." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You say careful. Was there someone specific from whom she sought to distance herself?" Raynaud's eyes flickered toward the door, as if fearing someone might overhear. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There was a man, Gaspard Leroux, a wealthy patron of the arts. He admired Vivienne, perhaps too openly at times. She tolerated him for the sake of her career, but I always felt there was something off about his attentions. He was possessive." "Ah," Poirot murmured, his fingers tapping gently against his chin. "And this Monsieur Leroux, has he visited your studio recently?" Raynaud's brow furrowed as he considered the question. "Not that I recall, but he often attended my exhibitions. He has been known to visit my studio unannounced, though not in recent weeks." Poirot's mind leapt swiftly from one detail to the next. The brooch left behind, the cigarette holder, the open window. Each clue suggested a presence beyond Vivienne's, but one marked by stealth rather than open confrontation. Lambert, clearly growing weary of the artist's evasions, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should pay this Leroux a visit, Poirot. If the girl feared him, perhaps he had reason to silence her." Poirot's eyes flicked momentarily to the portrait once more. "Yes, perhaps we should," he said, though his tone suggested that his thoughts were already moving in a different direction. He turned back to the chaise, his gaze falling once more on the delicate cigarette holder. "But first, let us confirm one small detail." He crossed to the chaise and carefully lifted the velvet cushion once more, peering into the narrow gap between the fabric and the polished wooden frame. His hand emerged holding a thin, crumpled piece of paper, its edges frayed as if hastily torn. He unfolded it with the utmost care, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the hastily scrawled message. The handwriting was feminine, the ink smudged but still legible. "Mon cher Lucien," Poirot read aloud, his voice low but steady. "I fear I must flee, for the danger is greater than I imagined. I cannot tell you more, but know that I have always valued your friendship. Do not seek me, for I may already be beyond your reach. V." Raynaud's face paled, his hands trembling as he reached for the note. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. She knew something. She was afraid." Poirot's expression remained inscrutable as he returned the note to the artist. "Yes, Monsieur Raynaud, it seems Mademoiselle Marchand was not as carefree as you believed. She feared for her safety, and perhaps for her very life." Lambert's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "This changes everything, Poirot. If she truly feared for her life, then we are not merely searching for a missing girl. We may be hunting a killer." Poirot said nothing, his eyes once more drawn to the portrait, his mind already racing ahead, piecing together the fragmented whispers of fear and deception that hung like a ghost in the shadowed corners of the studio. Poirot slipped the crumpled note back into Raynaud's trembling hands, his keen eyes never missing the way the artist's fingers tightened around the fragile paper, creasing it further. Fear, yes, but also something more. Perhaps a hint of guilt, or perhaps merely the profound shock of realizing that his muse had kept secrets from him. Raynaud's voice, when it finally emerged, was little more than a hoarse whisper. "But why would she not tell me? he murmured, his gaze fixed on the hastily scrawled lines as if willing them to make sense. "I would have protected her, whatever the danger." Poirot regarded him with a mix of sympathy and suspicion. "Perhaps, Monsieur Renaud, she feared that involving you would only place you in greater peril. Or perhaps, in her distress, she did not know whom to trust." Lambert stepped closer, his jaw set in a grim line. The girl was clearly frightened, and that note all but confirms she believed herself in danger. "We should bring this Leroux in for questioning at once." Poirot's head tilted slightly, his mustache twitching in a gesture of mild reproach. "Patience, mon ami. We must tread carefully. It is not enough to seize a man on the mere suggestion of a threat. First, we must understand the nature of the danger she faced." The inspector exhaled sharply, clearly struggling to restrain his more direct instincts. "And how do you propose we do that, Poirot? The girl is gone, and her only message to us is this half-formed plea." Poirot's eyes drifted back to the portrait, that silent, painted echo of Vivienne's presence. "We begin, perhaps, by seeking the hidden truths that others have overlooked. We must look at everything, yes, even at this painting, for in such details the truth often hides." He moved closer to the portrait, his eyes narrowing as he examined the fine brushstrokes that formed the folds of Vivienne's gown. His gaze lingered on the delicate pattern of lilies woven into the fabric, the intricate lace around her slender wrists, and the faint shimmer of light captured in the folds of her skirt. Then his eyes alighted on a small, seemingly insignificant detail, an emerald ring, delicately painted onto the fourth finger of Vivienne's left hand. The ring was small but vividly rendered, its green stone catching the light with almost lifelike brilliance. Poirot's brow furrowed. "Monsieur Renaud," he said slowly, his voice carrying a note of curiosity, "I do not recall seeing such a ring among Mademoiselle Marchand's belongings. Is it possible that she owned this piece of jewelry without your knowledge?" Renaud blinked, his eyes shifting uncertainly to the painted hand, as if seeing the ring for the first time. "No," he said quickly, his tone defensive. "Vivienne never wore such a ring. She had few possessions, and this is not one of them." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the small green gem, his mind turning over the possibilities. An imagined embellishment, a token from a secret admirer, or perhaps a deliberate message hidden in plain sight by the artist's hand. Before he could press further, the door to the studio creaked open once more, and a young constable entered, his face flushed with the urgency of his message. "Inspector Lambert," he said, his breath coming in short, nervous bursts. "We have just received word. There has been a break-in at Monsieur Leroux's townhouse. The place was ransacked, and the staff are in a state of panic." Lambert's eyes darkened, and he shot Poirot a meaningful glance. "A coincidence, do you think?" Poirot's lips curved into a thin, thoughtful smile. "Hardly, mon ami. It seems the threads of this mystery are beginning to intertwine." Without another word, he straightened his cuffs, adjusted his immaculate tie, and strode toward the door, Lambert following close behind. Renaud, visibly torn between fear and curiosity, hesitated only a moment before rushing after them, the crumpled note still clutched tightly in his hand. The journey to Leroux's residence took little time. The police motor car, cutting swiftly through the bustling Paris streets. Poirot, seated beside Lambert, remained silent, his sharp eyes taking in the passing scene with a quiet intensity. He could almost feel the pieces of the puzzle shifting into place, each new revelation adding depth to the shadowy portrait of deceit and danger that now surrounded the missing Vivienne Marchand. They arrived at Leroux's townhouse to find the grand stone building in disarray. The front door hung open, one of its ornate brass hinges splintered, and a uniformed officer stood guard, his face pale as he waved them inside. The interior was a chaotic scene of overturned furniture, shattered glass, and scattered papers. Leroux's housekeeper, a stout, grey-haired woman in a frayed black dress, stood wringing her hands in the center of the foyer, her eyes wide with fear. Poirot approached her gently, his voice soft but insistent. "Madame, if you please, tell us what happened here." The woman's lips trembled as she spoke, her voice shaking. It was like a storm, monsieur. They came in the night, perhaps 2, maybe 3 of them. They tore through the house, searching for something. I heard them whispering, but I was too frightened to move. Poirot's eyes flicked to the shattered glass cabinet nearby, its shelves empty save for a single, delicate crystal decanter that had miraculously escaped destruction. "And Monsieur Leroux? Where is he now?" The housekeeper's face crumpled with fresh terror. "Gone, monsieur. Vanished. I have not seen him since yesterday." Poirot's eyes sharpened, his mind already weaving these new threads into the tapestry of the mystery. He turned to Lambert, his voice firm. "You see, mon ami, the plot thickens. Our missing artist's muse and this wealthy patron, both vanished, each leaving behind only the faintest trace of their passing." Lambert's jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the wreckage with a practiced detective scrutiny. "You believe the two are connected, then?" Poirot's expression grew distant, his mind leaping ahead to possibilities yet unseen. "I believe, Inspector, that we have not yet seen the full shape of this affair, but it is taking form, slowly but surely. The picture, as always, is in the details." As he spoke, his gaze drifted once more to the scattered papers on the polished marble floor. Bending down, he carefully lifted a single sheet, his eyes narrowing as he took in the hurried, almost desperate handwriting. It was a letter addressed to Leroux himself, and though the ink had smeared in places, one word stood out with startling clarity. "Vivienne." Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, the pieces were falling into place, but the true shape of the mystery remained hidden, just as the artist's hand had concealed its meaning within the folds of a painted gown. Poirot straightened, the hastily scrawled letter clutched delicately between his fingertips. The name Vivienne leapt from the page, a stark reminder of the vanished muse whose absence had become the dark center of this growing web of intrigue. He scanned the letter quickly, his eyes moving with the precision of a watchmaker examining a complex mechanism. The script, though hurried, retained a certain elegance, clearly the work of an educated hand, but one now unsteady with fear or urgency. "Monsieur Leroux, you must stop this madness. Whatever promises you made, whatever secrets you hold, they will destroy you. She is not what she seems, and neither am I. You have been warned." V. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he folded the letter carefully, his mind already dissecting the implications of each hastily formed line. A warning, yes, but also an accusation. The writer, clearly Vivienne, had not only feared for herself, but for Leroux as well. She had sensed a gathering storm, a threat that extended beyond her own peril. Lambert, who had been watching Poirot's intense scrutiny of the letter with barely contained impatience, cleared his throat. "Well, what does it say, Poirot? More desperate pleas for help?" Poirot met his friend's gaze, his eyes sharp. "Not precisely. It is a warning, yes, but one laced with a curious contradiction. She urges Leroux to cease some madness of his own making, yet she claims that neither of them is as they seem. It suggests a deeper deception, one perhaps even she did not fully comprehend." Lambert's brow furrowed, his frustration evident. "Deception? You think the girl was hiding something from the start?" Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a hint of satisfaction in the subtle movement. "Ah, my friend, have I not always said that the greatest lies are often those we tell ourselves? Mademoiselle Marchand was a woman of many faces, it seems, perhaps even to herself." As they continued their slow, methodical inspection of the ransacked townhouse, Poirot's eyes lingered on each shattered vase, each overturned chair, each torn book. The destruction was deliberate, precise in its chaos, as if designed to convey a message. He moved to the grand fireplace at the far end of the drawing room, its mantel still adorned with the remnants of a once elegant display, polished silver candlesticks, a delicate porcelain clock, and a small framed photograph, its glass cracked but the image beneath still intact. He lifted the frame, carefully tilting it to catch the light filtering through the shattered windows. The photograph within depicted a younger Leroux, his arm wrapped proudly around a beautiful, dark-haired woman in an elegant gown. Vivian? No, the face was wrong, the features sharper, the eyes darker. Someone else, then. Lambert, who had drifted closer, peered over Poirot's shoulder. Who is that? Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the photograph. An excellent question, mon ami. One I suspect may prove quite important. He set the frame back on the mantel, his mind already moving ahead to the implications of this newfound connection. They continued their search, moving through the drawing room and into Leroux's private study, where the disorder grew even more pronounced. Books had been yanked from their shelves, papers scattered across the polished mahogany desk, the rich burgundy curtains torn half from their rods. Poirot moved to the desk, his sharp eyes scanning the cluttered surface. He paused, his hand hovering over a small, ornate box, its lacquered surface chipped and scratched in the chaos. He flipped open the lid, revealing a jumbled collection of letters, receipts, and small personal mementos. Carefully, Poirot sifted through the contents, his fingers moving with a surgeon's precision. At the bottom of the pile, he found a slim, leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with a delicate pattern of intertwined lilies and ivy. He opened it, his eyes immediately drawn to the flowing, cursive script within. He read the first few lines in silence, his expression growing more intense with each passing moment. Lambert, sensing a significant discovery, leaned in closer. "What is it, Poirot?" Poirot's voice was low, almost reverent. "It is a journal, mon ami. A record of Leroux's thoughts, his hopes, his fears, and perhaps the key to understanding this entire affair." He continued to read, the room around him falling into a hushed, expectant silence as the words on the page revealed themselves. "She is beautiful, yes, but also dangerous. I see it in her eyes, in the way she holds herself, as if each glance is a calculated move in a larger game. She speaks of freedom, of escape, but I sense a darker purpose behind her words. I cannot let her go, not now, not when I've invested so much." Poirot closed the journal, his expression unreadable as he turned to face Lambert. "It seems, my friend, that Monsieur Leroux did not merely admire Mademoiselle Marchand. He feared her, even as he clung to her. A dangerous combination, one that often leads to desperate, irreversible acts." Lambert's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "You think he had something to do with her disappearance, then?" Poirot's lips curved into a small, enigmatic smile. "Perhaps, but not in the way you might think. I suspect we are only just beginning to grasp the full scope of this affair. There are layers yet to uncover, secrets that even now hide in the shadows of this house." He slipped the journal into his jacket pocket, his mind already racing ahead to the next step in his investigation. As they moved back toward the entrance hall, the shattered remains of Leroux's once orderly life scattered at their feet, Poirot felt the familiar stirrings of certainty, an intuition that had never failed him in his long and storied career. The truth was out there, tangled in the chaos of shattered glass and broken promises, but it was not beyond his reach. He would find it, piece by careful piece, until the picture at last came into perfect, undeniable focus. As they stepped back into the cool morning air, the remnants of Leroux's shattered world echoing in the silence behind them, Poirot's mind raced with 100 intersecting thoughts. The journal in his pocket felt heavier with each step, its pages laden with the unspoken fears and unfulfilled promises of a man caught in the grasp of a dangerous infatuation. Lambert, still simmering with impatience, broke the silence as they reached the street. "So what now, Poirot? We have a missing girl, a ransacked house, and a frightened patron. What is our next move?" Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his eyes flicking to the bustling street beyond. "First, we must verify a suspicion, my friend. It is not enough to chase shadows. We must shed light upon them." They made their way swiftly back to Reynaud's studio, the narrow corridors and winding staircases of the old building echoing with the faint sounds of distant conversation and the clatter of a lone painter's easel. As they reached the door, they found it ajar, a thin line of light spilling onto the darkened hallway beyond. Poirot paused, his sharp eyes narrowing as he signaled for silence. He eased the door open, his movements precise and deliberate, and slipped quietly into the studio. Inside, they found Elise Fournier, her slender figure silhouetted against the morning light streaming through the tall windows. She was bent over the chaise where Vivian had once posed, her delicate fingers tracing the velvet cushions as if searching for something. She started violently as Poirot cleared his throat, her eyes widening in panic as she spun to face them. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Lambert, I did not hear you enter," she stammered, her cheeks flushed a deep, guilty crimson. Poirot's gaze remained steady, his head tilting slightly as he observed her discomfort. "Indeed, mademoiselle, it seems we have caught you in the act of some small trespass." Elise's hands fluttered to her sides, her fingers twisting nervously in the folds of her apron. I thought perhaps Vivian had left something behind. Something that might explain why she disappeared?" Lambert's eyes narrowed, his voice hard. "Searching for what exactly? You seem to know this studio better than you let on." Elise's gaze flicked nervously between the two men, her breathing quick and shallow. "It is nothing, I assure you. I merely wished to see if there was a note, perhaps. Something that might explain her sudden flight." Poirot stepped closer, his sharp eyes never leaving her face. "A curious impulse, mademoiselle. Given that you claim to know little of Vivienne's private affairs, why then would you expect to find such a note here, in the very place where she vanished?" Elise's lips parted, her eyes brimming with sudden, fearful tears. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, you do not understand. I only wanted to help. Vivienne was my friend, even if she did not always see me as such. I could not bear the thought of her in danger." Poirot's mustache twitched, his expression softening slightly. "And yet you did not come to us when she first disappeared. You chose, instead, to slip quietly into the shadows, hoping to find answers on your own." Elise's shoulders slumped, her thin frame trembling. "I was afraid, monsieur, afraid of what I might find, afraid of what others might think." Lambert's jaw tightened, his frustration clearly growing. "Afraid of what, exactly? If you have information about Vivian's disappearance, you had best speak plainly." For a moment, it seemed as though Elise might break, her resolve crumbling beneath the combined weight of their scrutiny. But then, with a visible effort, she straightened, her tear-streaked face hardening into a mask of defiance. "I know nothing, Inspector," she said, her voice suddenly steady. "Nothing that would help you find her. I only wish to understand." Poirot's eyes lingered on her for a long, silent moment, his mind weighing the truth of her words against the countless small signs of deception he had already noted. He reached into his pocket, drawing forth the crumpled letter he had found in Leroux's townhouse. "Perhaps, then, you might help us understand this," he said, holding the letter before her eyes. Elise's face drained of color, her eyes widening in unmistakable recognition. She took an involuntary step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "You know this, do you not?" Poirot pressed, his voice low but insistent. "It is a warning, penned by the very woman you claim to have loved as a friend. She speaks of danger, of secrets, of promises broken. Tell me, mademoiselle, what is it that you fear so greatly?" Elise's hand dropped to her side, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. I cannot say. Please, Monsieur Poirot, you must believe me. I would tell you if I could." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on her trembling form, his mind already turning over the implications of her reaction. She knew something, of that he was certain, but whether it was a fear for herself or for the vanished Vivian remained unclear. Lambert, clearly unwilling to let the moment slip away, stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Enough of this evasion. If you know something, speak now, or you will find yourself facing far more serious charges than mere trespass." Elise's head snapped up, her eyes locking with Lambert's in a sudden, fierce burst of defiance. "You do not understand, Inspector," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "There are things at play here that you cannot imagine, forces that even Vivian could not escape." Poirot's eyes sharpened, his mind seizing upon the subtle shift in her tone. "Forces, mademoiselle. What forces are these?" Elise's mouth opened as if to speak, but then, with a sudden, panicked glance toward the door, she spun on her heel and fled, her footsteps echoing down the narrow hallway before either man could react. Lambert swore under his breath, already moving to give chase, but Poirot's hand shot out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "No, my friend," he said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the now empty doorway. "Let her run. She has just told us more than she realizes." Lambert frowned, his confusion evident. "What do you mean?" Poirot's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I mean, my dear Inspector, that the picture is becoming clearer. We are not merely dealing with a missing girl, but with a web of lies, betrayals, and half-spoken fears, and I suspect that, in the end, it will be the smallest, most insignificant detail that will reveal the true heart of this affair." With that, he released Lambert's arm and turned back to the studio, his mind already racing ahead to the next crucial step in their unfolding investigation. Poirot watched the shadow of Elise Fournier slip away into the winding corridors of the old building, her hurried footsteps fading into the muffled whispers of the distant ateliers. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The girl had revealed more than she realized, her every glance, every nervous tremor of her hands, betraying the depth of her fear. But fear of what, or of whom? Lambert, still seething with frustration, turned to Poirot, his hands clenched into tight fists. "Are you simply going to let her walk away, Poirot? She knows something, of that I'm certain." Poirot, adjusting the cuffs of his immaculately pressed sleeves, merely inclined his head. "Patience, mon ami. To chase her now would only drive her deeper into the shadows. No, we must allow her a moment to consider the precariousness of her position. In time, she will return to us, and perhaps then her tongue will be looser." Lambert muttered something under his breath, clearly unconvinced, but he deferred to Poirot's judgment with a grudging nod. They turned back to the studio, the thick, oil-scented air still heavy with the echoes of Elise's panicked flight. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the cluttered space, his mind moving with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. He moved to the chaise where Elise had been crouched moments before, his polished shoes silent on the worn wooden floorboards. He knelt carefully, his gloved fingers tracing the folds of the crushed velvet cushion, his eyes narrowing as he noted a faint indentation in the fabric. A small, circular impression, barely visible but unmistakably present. He rose slowly, his gaze shifting to the nearby easel, where Raynaud's unfinished portrait of Vivian still loomed, the painted figure gazing out from the canvas with her enigmatic half-smile. Poirot's eyes lingered on the delicate green ring adorning the model's painted hand, its small emerald catching the morning light as if it were a living gem. Without a word, he crossed the studio, his hand reaching for the small ornate box that rested atop Raynaud's cluttered work table. He flipped open the lid, revealing a jumble of brushes, half-used tubes of paint, and a scattering of small polished stones. His fingers moved with deliberate care, sifting through the colorful fragments until he found what he sought, a small, circular object, its emerald stone glinting in the soft light. He held it up to the light, his sharp eyes inspecting every facet, every tiny scratch on its surface. A ring, nearly identical to the one depicted in the portrait. A perfect match in size and shape, but without the shimmer of polished gold. Lambert, who had been pacing restlessly nearby, paused as he saw the ring in Poirot's hand. "What have you found there?" Poirot's eyes sparkled with a quiet, knowing satisfaction. "A clue, my friend, or perhaps the shadow of one." He slipped the ring into his pocket and straightened, his mind already turning over the implications of this small, seemingly insignificant detail. The painted ring, the hidden message, the frantic searches of both Elise and the mysterious intruders at Leroux's townhouse. Each piece of the puzzle fit together with a strange, unsettling precision, as if they were all part of a larger, carefully constructed illusion. As they made their way back to the street, Poirot's mind remained fixed on the ring, its tiny emerald stone glittering in the shadows of his jacket pocket. He felt the weight of the journal pressing against his side, its leather cover warm against his hand. The pieces were aligning, slowly but surely, but there remained one final, critical thread to unravel before the true shape of the mystery could emerge. They returned to the small, smoke-filled office that Lambert called his headquarters, its walls lined with the yellowing files and faded photographs of 100 unsolved cases. The inspector sank heavily into his creaking leather chair, his eyes fixed on Poirot as the little Belgian detective paced slowly before the cluttered desk. "Out with it, Poirot," Lambert said, his tone sharp with impatience. "You have the look of a man on the verge of some grand revelation. Do not keep me in suspense." Poirot paused, his eyes gleaming with the quiet triumph of a man who had at last glimpsed the hidden pattern within the chaos. "Very well, mon ami. Consider this. We have a vanished girl, a ransacked townhouse, and a circle of acquaintances each harboring their own dark secrets. And yet, one detail remains constant. A ring, small and unremarkable to the untrained eye, but significant enough to drive at least two people to desperate measures." Lambert's brow furrowed, his mind struggling to grasp the threads of Poirot's reasoning. "The ring, what of it? You found it in the studio, yes, but what does it prove?" Poirot smiled, his mustache twitching with barely contained amusement. "It proves, my friend, that our vanished model was not merely a muse, but a player in a much larger, more dangerous game. A game in which the stakes are far higher than mere art or infatuation." Lambert's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening with a mixture of frustration and grudging admiration. "You believe this ring holds the key to her disappearance?" Poirot inclined his head, his eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of a master detective on the cusp of discovery. "I do. But to prove it, we must first unravel the final layer of this mystery, the last hidden connection that binds our missing girl to the shadowy figures that haunt her footsteps." With that, he rose from his seat, his polished shoes clicking softly against the worn wooden floor as he made his way to the door. "Come, my friend. There is one final piece of the puzzle to uncover, and I believe I know just where to find it." Lambert, caught up in the irresistible pull of Poirot's confidence, rose quickly and followed, his mind racing with the possibilities that still lay hidden in the shadows of the missing girl's world. Poirot led the way down the bustling Parisian streets, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the cobblestones as he wove through the mid-morning crowds. The city hummed around them, the air thick with the scent of fresh bread and the low murmur of hurried conversations. Lambert followed in his wake, his long strides struggling to match the smaller man's quick, purposeful pace. At last, they reached the imposing stone façade of the Galerie Montparnasse, its grand arched entrance framed by rows of tall, iron-latticed windows that glinted in the morning sun. Poirot paused at the threshold, his sharp eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. A trio of well-dressed patrons lingering by the entrance, their hushed whispers and nervous glances betraying a shared, unspoken anxiety. Without a word, Poirot pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the polished marble floors and the gleaming gilt-framed canvases that lined the walls. A hush fell over the small crowd of art enthusiasts as they caught sight of the famous detective, their conversations trailing off into uneasy silence. Poirot's eyes flicked to a familiar figure standing near the center of the gallery. A tall, thin man with a hawk-like profile and a shock of unruly, gray-streaked hair. It was Renaud, his paint-stained fingers twitching nervously at his sides as he studied a nearby canvas, his eyes darting to Poirot with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Monsieur Renaud," Poirot called, his voice sharp but polite as he approached the artist. "A moment, if you please." Renaud flinched, his head snapping up as if caught in the act of some small, shameful crime. He forced a tight, brittle smile, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Poirot and the grim-faced Lambert at his side. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice strained but steady. "I did not expect to see you here. Has there been some development?" Poirot's eyes sparkled with a quiet, knowing amusement. "Indeed there has, my friend. But first, a question, if I may." Renaud's brow furrowed, his thin, paint-streaked hands clenching at his sides. "Of course. What would you ask of me?" Poirot reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers closing around the cool, hard edges of the small, emerald-studded ring he had discovered in the studio. He held it up to the light, its tiny stone catching the morning sun and casting a faint, green reflection across the polished marble floor. "Tell me, monsieur," Poirot said quietly, his eyes fixed on Renaud's face. "Do you recognize this ring?" Renaud's eyes widened, his thin, lined face draining of color as he stared at the small, glittering circle in Poirot's hand. He took an involuntary step back, his breath catching in his throat as if he had been struck. That is Vivienne's ring," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Where did you find it?" Poirot's smile deepened, his sharp eyes never leaving the artist's pale, stricken face. "In your studio, monsieur, hidden among your paints and brushes, as if you hoped to bury it beneath the layers of your work, to forget that it ever existed." Renaud's hands trembled, his fingers twitching nervously as he struggled to find his voice. I do not understand. How could it be there? Vivienne never left it behind. She cherished that ring, clung to it as if it were her very soul." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind already racing ahead to the implications of this small but significant detail. "And yet here it is, abandoned among the remnants of your work, as if she no longer had need of it. Or perhaps, monsieur, as if someone else had taken it from her, someone who wished to see it hidden, forgotten, erased." Renaud's face twisted into a mask of barely contained fear, his eyes flicking nervously to the nearby patrons, their curious stares only adding to his growing panic. He opened his mouth to protest, to deny the unspoken accusation in Poirot's sharp, unrelenting gaze, but no words came. Lambert, sensing the artist's growing distress, took a step closer, his voice low and threatening. "Come now, Renaud. Out with it. What do you know of Vivienne's disappearance? Speak plainly before this matter grows any darker." Renaud's head snapped toward the inspector, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. I know nothing of her disappearance," he stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure of their combined scrutiny. "I only know that she feared something. Someone. She spoke often of shadows, of eyes that watched her from the darkness, of whispers that followed her every step." Poirot's eyes sharpened, his mind seizing upon this small but crucial revelation. "And yet she remained with you, monsieur, posing for your portraits, entrusting you with her likeness, even as she feared for her life." Why would she do such a thing if she truly believed herself in danger? Renaud's thin, paint-streaked hands clenched into fists at his sides, his eyes filling with a sudden, desperate anger. "Because she had no choice," he snapped, his voice rising in a tremulous, fearful whisper. "Because she was trapped, caught in a web of her own making, bound by promises and lies that she could not escape." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a fierce, triumphant light, his mind racing ahead to the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. "And you, monsieur, did you not see the danger? Did you not sense the darkness that surrounded her, the shadows that threatened to consume her?" Renaud's head dropped, his thin shoulders slumping in defeat. I tried to warn her," he whispered, his voice choked with regret. "I tried to make her see, but she would not listen. She only smiled, that sad, bitter smile of hers, and told me that it was too late, that the die had already been cast." Poirot's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile, his mind already moving ahead to the next step in his carefully constructed plan. The pieces were falling into place, the final threads of the mystery weaving together into a single, undeniable truth. With a final, lingering glance at the pale, trembling artist, Poirot turned on his heel and made his way back toward the gallery entrance, Lambert close behind, his mind racing with the implications of all they had just uncovered. As they stepped back into the sunlit street, the sounds of the bustling city rising around them once more, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. The truth was within his grasp, its shape becoming clearer with each passing moment, its final, devastating revelation only a few short steps away. The afternoon sun hung low over the Parisian skyline as Poirot and Lambert made their way back to the narrow, smoke-filled confines of the inspector's office. The day's heat had settled into a thick, oppressive haze, the city's cobbled streets shimmering in the golden light. Poirot's mind, however, remained as sharp and precise as ever, his little grey cells working tirelessly to unravel the final, tangled threads of the mystery that had ensnared them. Lambert collapsed into his creaking leather chair, his shirt collar damp with sweat and his eyes dark with fatigue. He leaned forward, his elbows resting heavily on the cluttered desk as he fixed Poirot with a weary, expectant stare. "Well, Poirot," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "you have led me on quite the chase today, but I must admit I'm still no closer to understanding this tangled affair. What exactly have we uncovered? A missing girl, a ring hidden among an artist's paints, and a circle of nervous, half-truths and evasions. But what does it all mean?" Poirot smiled, his eyes sparkling with the quiet triumph of a man who had at last glimpsed the hidden pattern within the chaos. "Ah, mon ami," he said, slipping into the chair opposite Lambert's desk, his polished shoes crossing neatly at the ankles. "It means that we are very close to the truth. Closer, in fact, than even our dear Monsieur Renaud realizes." Lambert's brow furrowed, his mind struggling to grasp the threads of Poirot's reasoning. "Explain, then. What is it that you see that I have somehow missed?" Poirot leaned forward, his slender fingers steepling before his face as he spoke. "Consider what we know, my friend. We have a young woman, Vivienne Marchand, who vanishes without a trace. Her patron, Leroux, is terrified, his home ransacked, and his heart broken. Her artist, Renaud, trembles at the mere mention of her name, his every gesture a confession of unspoken guilt. And then there is our dear Mademoiselle Elise, who searches frantically for something hidden, something lost." Lambert's eyes narrowed, his mind racing to keep pace with Poirot's quick, precise deductions. But what connects them all? What unites these scattered pieces into a single, coherent whole? Poirot's smile deepened, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a master detective on the cusp of revelation. "The ring, my friend. The ring that I found hidden in Renaud's studio, the ring that Vivienne cherished above all else, the ring that she clung to as if it were her very soul." Lambert's head tilted, his brow furrowing in confusion. But what of it? It is only a trinket, a small piece of jewelry. What significance could it possibly hold? Poirot's fingers tightened, his eyes never leaving Lambert's bewildered face. It is not merely a trinket, my friend, but a symbol of a bond, a promise, a secret. And that secret, I believe, is the key to our entire mystery. Lambert's eyes narrowed, his mind struggling to grasp the meaning behind Poirot's cryptic words. A secret. What sort of secret? Poirot's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. A dangerous one, mon ami. One that ties our vanished model to a circle of powerful, dangerous men. Men who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, to silence those who might betray them. Lambert's eyes widened, his jaw tightening with a mixture of fear and disbelief. You mean, you believe that Vivienne was involved in something criminal, that her disappearance was no mere flight, but a deliberate act of self-preservation? Poirot inclined his head, his eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. Precisely, my friend. Vivienne was no mere artist's muse, no simple object of beauty to be admired and forgotten. She was a woman of cunning, of ambition, of courage. She saw too much, knew too much, and in the end, she paid the price for her dangerous knowledge. Lambert's hands tightened into fists, his face darkening with the realization of what Poirot had just implied. But if that is true, then we are not merely searching for a missing girl, but for a witness to a crime so dangerous, so far-reaching that it has driven her into hiding. Poirot's eyes sparkled with a fierce, triumphant light. Yes, mon ami, and that is why we must tread carefully. For if Vivienne still lives, then those who seek to silence her will stop at nothing to see her found, to see her secrets buried forever. Lambert rose from his chair, his eyes blazing with a renewed sense of purpose. Then we must act quickly, Poirot. We must find her before they do. Poirot rose as well, his movements precise and controlled as ever, his mind already racing ahead to the next step in his carefully constructed plan. Indeed, my friend, and I believe that our next step must be to confront the one person who holds the final, crucial piece of this puzzle. The one person who has remained silent, who has hidden in the shadows, but who now, at last, must face the full light of our investigation. Lambert's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. And who exactly do you mean? Poirot's smile deepened, his eyes gleaming with quiet, unshakable confidence. Why, the one person who first drew us into this tangled web of lies and betrayals, the one person who has the most to lose and the most to hide. Come, my friend, it is time that we paid another visit to our dear Monsieur Leroux. With that, Poirot turned on his polished heel, his steps sharp and precise as he made his way to the door, Lambert close behind, his mind racing with the implications of all that they had just uncovered. The final act of their carefully constructed drama was about to begin, and Poirot, with the full force of his little grey cells, intended to see it through to its stunning, undeniable conclusion. The sun had just begun to dip below the Paris rooftops when Hercule Poirot and Inspector Lambert arrived once more at the grand residence of Claude Leroux. The sky burned with the last traces of orange and violet, a fitting backdrop, Poirot thought, for the final act of a most unsettling drama. A uniformed officer let them in without question, and Leroux's butler, a stiff man with watchful eyes, guided them again through the echoing corridors. Claude Leroux received them in his study this time, an austere room, all angles and shadows, lined with shelves of art books and portfolios. He stood when they entered, the tension in his shoulders unmistakable. The once flamboyant gallery owner had been worn thin by the week's events. "You return with news?" he asked, his voice careful, guarded. Poirot smiled politely and took a slow glance around the study, noting the clean desk, the shut window, the untouched tumbler of water on a silver tray. "Oui, Monsieur Leroux. The time has come for clarity. The mists, they have parted. Shall we sit?" Leroux hesitated. then gestured them toward the chairs by the hearth. "Please." When they were seated, Poirot folded his hands in his lap. "I should like to recount the tale as I now understand it. You see, from the first moment, the mystery of Mademoiselle Vivienne was not about how she vanished, but why." Leroux's eyes flickered. "I imagine you have your theory." "Oh, not a theory, monsieur. A conclusion." Poirot leaned slightly forward. "Vivienne was clever. She walked into your gallery not simply to model, but to investigate. She knew what she was looking for, and I believe she found it." Lambert shifted beside him, watching Leroux closely. The man's hands twitched where they rested on his knees. Poirot continued, his voice calm. "Your collection, though highly regarded, includes pieces with questionable provenance. I have taken the liberty of contacting a colleague at Interpol. Several canvases in your private collection match descriptions of works reported missing or stolen from occupied estates during the war." Leroux flinched, but said nothing. "Vivienne, I believe, discovered something. Perhaps a signature obscured beneath paint, a clue in a ledger. She confronted you. She demanded that you come clean, or that she would go to the authorities." Poirot paused. "And you panicked." The room was quiet for a moment. Leroux's mouth worked soundlessly before he forced out, "You think I harmed her?" "No," Poirot said gently. "You are a man of pride, but not violence. You arranged for her silence in another way. You hired someone to escort her away, to pay her off, perhaps frighten her, but not to kill. The ransacked apartment? A message, yes, but one orchestrated. Meant to say, she left, and not by choice, and in the panic you caused, you hoped the truth would dissolve in the noise." Leroux's facade crumbled slightly. His eyes, wide and unfocused, looked past Poirot. "It was never supposed to go this far," he whispered. "I told them just to scare her. That's all." Poirot nodded gravely. "But you did not understand the kind of men you involved. They do not frighten. They erase." Lambert stood slowly. "Who did you contact, Leroux?" The man sagged forward, burying his face in his hands. "A man named Morel. He handles things. For others. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know." Poirot rose. "Morel is known to us. Dangerous, discreet, expensive. It is likely that he did not act immediately. Vivienne vanished 5 days ago, but she was last seen leaving the gallery 10 days ago. That gap is important." Lambert nodded. "She may still be alive." "She is," Poirot said. "I'm convinced of it." Leroux looked up. "How can you be so sure?" "Because," said Poirot, "she left a clue, hidden in Reynaud's painting. Not just her ring, but her pose, the angle of her hand, the tilt of her head. It mimics another work entirely. A painting by Vermeer." Lambert blinked. Vermeer. Poirot moved to the bookshelf and pulled out a volume on Dutch masters. "Yes. In the Vermeer, a young woman turns away from a mirror, startled. But in Reynaud's painting, she turns toward it, eyes wide. She was signaling, 'Look closer,' not at her, but at the reflection." He opened the book and pointed, and in Reynaud's painting, the mirror shows part of the room not visible from the front, an alcove. We returned and searched that alcove. Hidden there, inside the baseboard, was a note. It simply said, 'They are watching. I will not run. V.' Lambert exhaled. "She left it for us? For someone?" Poirot nodded. "And I believe she hid again, on her terms this time. She would have needed help. Someone she trusted. Not Leroux, not Reynaud, not Elise, who was too frantic, too disoriented. No, someone outside that circle." He looked directly at Leroux. "Someone like Madame Lemoine." Leroux stiffened. "The concierge?" "She sees all, knows who comes, who goes. She lied to us during our first visit. Said Vivienne had many callers. Yet the doorman said otherwise. That contradiction disturbed me." Lambert turned to Leroux. "Where does she live?" Upstairs, the attic floor. Without another word, they moved swiftly, Leroux following, shoulders slumped. Poirot ascended the stairs with purposeful steps. At the top floor, they knocked on the plain wooden door. It opened after a moment, revealing Madame Lemoine, wrapped in a shawl, her expression tight. "You're back," she said flatly. Poirot stepped forward. "Madame, we believe Mademoiselle Vivienne entrusted you with her safety. We do not come to punish. We come to protect. If she is here, let us see her." Madame Lemoine hesitated, then stepped aside. "She wouldn't let me call anyone, said she had to be sure first, that no one else could be trusted." In the back room, behind a partition, Vivienne stood. Her face was pale, her figure thinner, but her eyes still held the same fire. She looked at Poirot, and something eased in her shoulders. "You found the note," she said. Poirot bowed slightly. "And now, mademoiselle, it is time for truth. The whole truth. And justice." She nodded slowly. "Yes, let's finish this." And as Lambert moved to secure a protective escort, Poirot turned to the window. The city stretched out beneath him, golden and fading into night. Another case solved, not with bullets or brute force, but with careful deduction, relentless logic, and above all, an understanding of the human heart. He smiled, faintly. "Et voilà," he murmured. "The picture is complete."